Random House Audio presents The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. Read for you by Martin Wenner.
It happened every year, was almost a ritual. And this was his 82nd birthday. When, as usual, the flower was delivered, he picked up the telephone to call Detective Superintendent Morell, who, when he retired, had moved to Lake Siljan. The old policeman was sitting with his coffee, waiting, expecting the call. It arrived? What is it this year? I don't know. I'll have to get someone to tell me. It's white. No letter, I suppose. Just the flower. Postmark? Stockholm. Handwriting? Same as always, all in capitals. The retired policeman drew on his pipe. He knew he was no longer expected to come up with a pithy comment or sharp question which would shed new light on the case. Those days had long since passed, and the exchange between the two men seemed like a ritual attaching to a mystery which no one else in the whole world had the least interest in unravelling. Someone at the Botanical Gardens in Uppsala would later confirm that it was a plant native to the Australian bush, desert snow. It was only one in the series of mystifying flowers that each year arrived by post on the first day of November. They were always beautiful, and for the most part rare, pressed and mounted on watercolour paper in a simple frame. The strange story of the flowers had never been reported in the press. Only a very few people knew of it. 30 years ago, the regular arrival of the flower was the object of much scrutiny at the National Forensic Laboratory, among fingerprint experts, graphologists, criminal investigators, and one or two relatives and friends of the recipient. Now the actors in the drama were but three: the elderly birthday boy, the retired police detective, and the person who had posted the flower. The first two at least had reached such an age that the group of interested parties would soon be further diminished. The case of the pressed flowers had been nagging at the detective for years, his last unsolved and frustrating case. The situation was doubly absurd because, after spending literally thousands of hours brooding, on duty and off, he could not say beyond doubt that a crime had indeed been committed. The two men knew that there would be no fingerprints on the frame, which could have been bought in stationery stores the world over. Most often the parcel was posted in Stockholm, but 3 times from London, twice from Paris, twice from Copenhagen, once from Madrid, and once from Pensacola, Florida. The detective superintendent had had to look it up in an atlas. After putting down the telephone, the 82-year-old birthday boy looked up to the wall above his desk. There hung 43 pressed flowers in their frames, 4 rows of 10 and one at the bottom with 4. In the top row one was missing from the 9th slot. Desert snow would be number 44. Without warning, he began to weep. He surprised himself with this sudden burst of emotion after almost 40 years. The trial was irretrievably over. Everything that could be said had been said, but Carl Michael Blomqvist had never doubted that he would lose. The verdict was handed down at 10 on Friday morning, and all that remained was a summing up from the reporters waiting in the corridor outside the district court. Blomqvist saw them through the doorway and slowed his step. But questions were unavoidable, and he, of all people, knew that they had to be asked and answered. He straightened up and tried to smile. The reporters gave him friendly, almost embarrassed greetings. "Give us a sound bite, Kalle Blomqvist." It was a reporter from one of the evening papers. Blomqvist, hearing the nickname, forced himself, as always, not to roll his eyes. Once, when he was 23 and had just started his first summer job as a journalist, Blomqvist had chanced upon a gang which had pulled off 5 bank robberies. Blomqvist was staying at a summer cabin near Katrineholm. Exactly why he made the connection he could not explain. But as he was listening to the news report of the latest robbery, he remembered a group of 4 men in a cabin a few hundred meters down the road. 4 blonde, athletic types. There had been no good reason to suspect them, but nevertheless he had gone to a hill overlooking their cabin. A Volvo drove up, and the young men got out in a hurry, each carrying a sports bag. One took something from the boot, which he hurriedly covered with his jacket. Even from Blomqvist's relatively distant observation post, he could tell that it was a good old AK-4, the rifle that had been his constant companion for the year of his military service. He called the police, and that was the start of a 3-day siege, with Blomqvist in a front-row seat, collecting a gratifyingly large fee from an evening paper. The fall of the gang launched him as a journalist. The downside of his celebrity was that another newspaper could not resist using the headline, "Kalle Blomqvist solves the case," after the boy detective in Astrid Lindgren's book. In spite of his respect for Lindgren, he detested the nickname. It took him several years and far weightier journalistic successes before the nickname began to fade, but he still cringed if it was ever used. Right now he achieved a placid smile and said to the reporter, "Oh, come on, think of something yourself. You usually do." His tone was not unpleasant. They all knew each other, more or less. "You took a real hit in there," said the one from Dagens Nyheter, clearly a young part-timer. "How does it feel?" Neither Blomqvist nor the elder journalist could help smiling. How does it feel? The half-witted sports reporter shoves his microphone in the face of the breathless athlete on the finishing line. "I can only regret that the court did not come to a different conclusion," Blomqvist said, a bit stuffily. 3 months in jail and 150,000 kroner damages, that's pretty severe, said the woman from TV4. "I'll survive." "Are you going to apologize to Wennerström? Shake his hand?" "I think not." "So you still would say that he's a crook?" Dagens Nyheter. The court had just ruled that Blomqvist had libelled Hans-Erik Wennerström. So what would happen if he repeated his claim on the court steps? Blomqvist did not want to find out. "I thought I had good reason to publish the information that was in my possession. The court has ruled otherwise, and I must accept that. I have no more to add." "But how did you come to forget that journalists actually have to back up their assertions?" TV4. Her expression was neutral, but Blomqvist thought that he saw a hint of disappointed repudiation in her eyes. "I have nothing to add," he repeated. But when the others had accepted this, TV4 asked her questions in front of the camera. She was kinder than he deserved, and there were enough clear answers to satisfy all the reporters still standing behind her. They had what they needed and headed back to their respective newsrooms. Blomqvist hopped on a bus to make his escape. He got off at Fridhemsplan and walked over to Café Anna. Half a minute after he had ordered a café latte and a sandwich, the lunchtime news came on the radio. Journalist Mikael Blomqvist of the magazine Millennium was sentenced this morning to 90 days in jail for aggravated libel of industrialist Hans-Erik Wennerström. In an article earlier this year that drew attention to the so-called Minos affair, Blomqvist claimed that Wennerström had used state funds intended for industrial investment in Poland for arms deals. Blomqvist was also sentenced to pay 150,000 kroner in damages. Blomqvist felt a growing heaviness and discomfort in his stomach. When he took a bite of his sandwich, the bread seemed to swell up in his mouth. He could hardly swallow it and pushed his plate aside. The judgment was a trifle, relatively speaking. Not armed robbery, murder, or rape, after all. From a financial point of view, however, it was serious. Blomqvist was part owner of Millennium and the magazine's publisher.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?